Welcome to After the Download, the podcast that explores how people really use apps and other digital platforms, and what that means for the businesses that own and build them. Hosted by RealityMind. On this podcast, we talk to product leaders, data scientists, editors, and journalists to uncover emerging trends, discuss best practices, and dive deep into the data behind everyday digital behavior that you need to win in today's competitive digital marketplace. Chris Haveman's guest for this episode of After the Download is Jacob Bourne, a widely respected tech market analyst from eMarketer, one of the leading sources of consumer insights and industry forecasts. Jacob and Chris had a wide-ranging conversation, focusing on the public's very legitimate and seemingly growing distrust of AI. Drawing on his extensive research and interviews, Jacob unravels how these concerns may be shaping tech innovation now and for the future. They examine why consumers still depend on social platforms so strongly and where that relationship is heading. They talk about how big tech giants are countering public backlash around data centers, AI regulation, and environmental impact. We discuss the emerging concept of AI-free branding and why it's unlikely to last in an AI-powered future. And lastly, Chris and Jacob talk about how companies can slow down, build responsible AI, and align their innovations with consumer sentiment to foster genuine loyalty. And now, Chris Haveman and Jacob Bourne.
So great to have you guys back on the podcast. Today I'm joined by Jacob Bourne. Jacob is a technology analyst at eMarketer. Really excited to get his views on technology, where he covers a wide range of topics. So Jacob, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me today, Chris. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you today on the world of AI and tech.
So maybe just to kick off, just for the benefit of our listeners, could you tell us a little bit about eMarketer, what you do there, what you cover, and so on?
As you said, I'm a technology analyst for eMarketer. When I joined the company, actually, I was on the connectivity and tech briefing as a technology analyst, where I covered just the whole gamut of technologies that are relevant to consumers and thus relevant to marketers, advertisers, e-commerce professionals, publishers. Our main audiences at eMarketer. Now I am on the long form team, and I write long form reports covering technology and ad tech, topics like the overlooked advertising opportunity in gaming, for example, AI regulation, two new topics for us, privacy, the increasing role of the increasing importance of digital privacy and being compliance. And then, consumer devices, media mix modeling. So a wide range of topics. That's kind of the sample. And really what we try to do at eMarketer is really, craft content that pinpoints actually, what's going to really help marketers do their jobs better. So what's happening in the tech environment, what's important to consumers, what's driving consumer behavior, and really breaking those often complex topics down into simple, actionable takeaways that our clients can really use to drive performance on their end.
Makes sense. Wide swathe of fascinating topics. I think today we're gonna dig in on this whole area of you sort of touched on it a little bit there, but the whole area of trust, technology, and trust, and how consumers are kind of reacting to changes in the technology landscape. I suppose stepping back, some of us are old enough to remember life before the internet.
Yeah.
Certainly life before the smartphone. But if we sort of start there, I mean, big picture. It wasn't that long ago there were no smartphones, and now we all kind of carry one. We're glued to it most of the time, a lot of us. How would you describe the kind of the way that smartphones went mainstream, and what that has meant?
As far as on the consumer front, I think the smartphone went from sort of a novelty item, something that a small share of the population, sort of the tech elites had, and now it's just completely ubiquitous, touching every portion of consumers' lives at this point, on a daily basis. So I think it's made the tech ecosystem really just vital for marketers to be, in terms of connecting with broader audiences. As ordinary people have become more dependent on things like the smartphone for their daily living, they're more willing to absorb and view these discretionary expenses as something that just needs to be part of their regular budgets. Whereas before, when it was, a new novelty item, it's like, oh, well, do I really need that? Do I, should I really spend money on that? And now it's like, well, you have to, and maybe you want to, maybe even you want to shell out more for a premium iPhone, the latest version, because it's more than just a gadget. It's actually part of your lifestyle now. I think we're starting to enter another interesting part of the cycle too with AI, and I'm sure we'll get to that in our conversation.
Yeah, definitely. We have to get to AI. For sure. Just coming back to the whole area of kind of trust, our theme for today. So I guess one of the observations I'd have is that maybe the environment started relatively fragmented in terms of whether it was the hardware or even operating systems relative to today. Certainly kind of applications, websites, a lot of fragmentation, and that we've seen greater concentration in a number of big tech giants who provide all sorts of things in the ecosystem. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that and this whole area of kind of trust and whether how that's changed over time with the rise of big tech.
The distrust has definitely grown over time, but I think that hasn't changed people's dependency on these technologies and platforms. And I think social media is a great example. Public sentiment about social media has been fairly low for years, but people still use those platforms because they provide a real need to communicate and also for brands to connect with consumers. So they remain relevant. I think what's happening now is that the rise of AI is sort of complicating this whole picture because AI itself has its issues that makes the public concerned. So one of the main concerns is around economic disruption. I mean, we don't know exactly how AI adoption is going to play out longer term. Is it going to lead to mass unemployment? I think it's an open question, and people are really concerned about that. There's also concerns around things like the spread of misinformation. AI's possible role, maybe interfering with elections. The impact it could have on students' learning. I mean, some studies say that it could help, but then there's growing concern about it actually eroding, cognitive ability. There's concerns about the impact it will have on human relationships, environmental impacts, and then, of course, a lot more beyond that. So the thing to note, of course, is that these concerns about AI are related to AI companies, which largely are the same companies that we've been talking about, big tech companies, and of course new startups which are playing a similar role as big tech. So I think that outsized influence that I mentioned about big tech that the public has had concerns about is now poised to really explode because of AI. So it really it sort of amplifies that impact on society through this new technology. Well, not new technology, but the new modern version, the generative AI, agentic AI version of AI, really amplifies those impacts on society. It is definitely, I would argue that it is fueling a bit of a disconnect between, or amplifying the disconnect between Silicon Valley and Main Street. As these tech companies continue to forcefully move forward on their infrastructure build-outs to support AI advancement, all the while these public concerns are mounting. I think it is creating a disconnect. And I think that the economic piece of that is a big one to keep in mind. And to illustrate that disconnect, I think you just need to look at the market. I mean, the Magnificent Seven, which is really the made up of these seven big tech companies that are heavily involved in the AI industry, are so heavily weighted in the S&P 500. I mean, I think it's like a third, right? So when these companies report their earnings, like five of them just did last week, I mean, it can sway the entire market one way or another. And I think that type of concentration really has some people concerned about the underlying economic health and whether the AI trade is kind of masking that. One example of how I think this is playing out is really in the built environment too, because the AI trade is really very much dependent on data centers that are increasingly filled with these powerful AI chips. And that's kind of like the physical footprint of this very powerful digital technology. And so I think while AI companies are barreling forward, that barreling forward kind of suggests that they're not terribly concerned about public sentiment around AI. But I think that there is some growing awareness that you do have to get the public on board with what you're doing to a certain extent. And I think a great example is Meta recently spending $6.4 million on an ad campaign, which it ran all over the US. And the focus of that campaign was to really convince local communities that data centers are good for them, not bad. And there's a simple reason why Meta felt the need to do this is because there's increasing backlash against these data center projects. I mean, not just in the US, but in parts of Europe and elsewhere as well. Data centers they're huge. They're huge. They're not terribly attractive architecturally. They use a lot of energy and water, and of course there's concerns among the public about potentially rising electric bills due to data centers being nearby. They even sometimes create noise pollution as well. So there's a lot of concerns as far as like the upside. There's talk of maybe some positive economic outcomes. Certainly they create construction jobs at least. But I don't think that people are entirely convinced that there's a lot of long-term benefit yet. So Meta certainly is concerned about that because they, in order to keep pace with with its competitors, data center build out is essential. And so I think that's an example of how public sentiment around this technology really certainly is having a direct impact on big tech's plans.
Yeah, made a lot of sense. And I guess if you put yourselves in the shoes of one of the big tech players, this is a transformational moment where potentially trillions of dollars of shareholder value might be created or destroyed, right? So
yes.
they kind of have a almost a fiduciary duty to their shareholders to execute the right strategy, or they may be seriously damaged by changes afoot by competitors. At the same time, you've raised a whole kind of really fascinating range of kind of consumer trust concerns. So what do you think is the playbook then? You mentioned Meta and an ad campaign, but do you think there's a broader playbook that they should be thinking about in terms of how they try and mitigate the negative trust impacts of their operations?
We've had advanced generative AI for a few years now, and end users and companies are still trying to figure out the best way to use it. So I think that there could be a case to build trust, public trust, by maybe slowing down the pace a bit and really focusing on how best to make how best to make use of AI, how to build the most user-friendly platforms that can really integrate well into people's daily lives, into workflows, while also minimizing disruption. And also how to do all this more sustainably, so that you don't have some of the environmental impacts, for example. So I think there's a case to maybe taking a slower, more thoughtful approach in terms of building AI more safely and then deploying it more responsibly. I think there's a path there. It's just about really focusing on those aspects of consumer sentiment that I mentioned, versus focusing so heavily on tech giants competing with each other and then trying to maybe please their shareholders on a quarterly basis, versus thinking about the long-term ramifications of AI.
Makes sense. I mean, it's really paradoxical, isn't it? It's always been true, I think, that people love lots of aspects of big tech. I remember we all, I think, had experiences with, let's say, ChatGPT, where there were things that you discovered quite early on that were like magic.
Yes.
The original iPhone was like magic, Wi-Fi was like magic.
Yeah.
So we love the magic. So there's this paradox that consumers get all these huge benefits and the excitement, and mobile phones can be status symbols. They are status symbols in many social groups, and yet this declining trust. I think more broadly that's probably there is a backdrop. I think if I think over my lifetime of less and less trust in institutions in general, whether that be the police or whoever it might be,
Right.
just declining trust as a backdrop, and ever more kind of like cynical populations. So I guess it's doubly hard for these very powerful organizations in that world, despite all the magic they create. I think your point sounds really sound. Like they've got to work on on strategies to try and mitigate that for their own good and for everybody's good.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You can't just blame a handful of companies on the trust issue, the larger trust issues that have a longer history to it. But I would say that what's happening with AI right now certainly isn't helping things.
One thing we talk a lot about RealityMind is we talk a lot about consumer behavior in the world of apps, and this idea of disloyalty, that another app, a competing app, is only a click away. And so how do you, as brands or app publishers, keep consumers, users loyal on your platform? In relation to this trust point, do you think we're going to see direct disloyalty because of lack of trust? Do you think people will make kind of switching decisions? Consumers will start choosing what services or platforms to use with some of these issues right at the forefront of their decision making?
Well, I think that's already a thing. Consumers definitely will gravitate towards brands that, for example, privacy. We've seen data that shows that consumers will definitely stop buying products from brands that if they think that their privacy has been violated, if their data has not been managed properly. And I think on the AI front, we might see some similar. I think we already kind of are seeing some similar impacts in terms of customer loyalty, in terms of the areas around like AI advertising. I mean, but just looking at loyalty more broadly, I mean, I think it just stems from brands really understanding consumers' values, their interests, and then really acting in accordance with that. And so that comes down to sending the message in the way that you do business that you have the consumer's best interest at heart. And it can show up in ways like, for example, maintaining privacy, as I mentioned, also just the quality of products, the longevity of products, still maintaining robust customer support, having a human in the loop for customer support, even in the AI era. So I think that those are some of the ways that you can maintain customer loyalty. The pricing that I think I mentioned earlier, I think consumers are certainly willing to pay a premium for products if they think that they're consistently going to get what they pay for, instead of quietly getting less over time. And so I think those are the things that people do notice and pay attention to, and I think that can either help build loyalty or erode it over time.
Do you think in this kind of world of fear around AI, and as you said, we don't yet know how many of these things are going to play out and impacts on employment, but there's already a lot of speculation that, for example, if you work in the creative industries, that might prove to be an area where there's going to be a lot of job losses because of AI. Do you think we might start to see tech brands, almost coming up with kind of no AI free positioning? Do you think that might be or maybe we're already seeing it? I don't know. You might know.
Yeah, I think we're already seeing it. And actually, we've been seeing it for, I would say, last 6 months or so, maybe more, and it's increased, and it's there's no mystery to why it's increased. A recent survey from Gallup actually showed that Gen Z's trust in AI dropped 14 percentage points year over year. And that was a recent poll that just came out, and I think that Gen Z is definitely a generation that brands are definitely pay attention to. This whole AI-free messaging is certainly having a moment right now. I think brands are leaning into it because they're realizing that even though people do think that AI is magical and are using it, there really are rising concerns about its impacts. and it kind of takes form in different ways. I mean, part of it is pledging a commitment to not using AI generated models, for example, and relying on human models. Some of it is kind of making fun of AI advertising and AI content. Some of it is kind of just showing AI generated content alongside real content and having people compare. It's a real phenomenon. And actually, a Gartner survey recently found that 50% of consumers would rather spend money with brands that don't use generative AI in marketing. So yeah, I think it's the kind of data that you need to pay attention to if you're a brand.
Wow, that's an amazing statistic.
Yeah,
that's an amazing statistic. Yeah.
So I think it sends a message that people are concerned. I don't think that AI-free messaging alone is enough. I anticipate that this trend with AI-free is going to wane over time. And the reason why is because I don't think AI is going anywhere. I think it's going to increasingly become part of our world, the way that society runs. And, while the trend, the AI-free trend it probably hasn't peaked yet. I think it's what we see with other anxieties around tech is that it kind of just they fade into the background eventually. Like people are like, I mentioned earlier, people are still concerned about social media, but it's not a focal point anymore, and people still use it. And so I anticipate that AI is going to play out in a similar fashion. There may be some more serious concerns around AI than around social media, so that is an important caveat there. But I think that the AI-free messaging trend, it has an expiration date.
Yeah, looking back over new innovations, this is a kind of classic thing, isn't it? In the early uncertain phase, there's all sorts of wild predictions.
Concerns about the accountability of the companies, these same companies that we're talking about, that's going to continue to persist. And I think that the heart of the AI-free messaging is really brands' ability to read what people are feeling at any moment. And that's the moment that we're having right now, is concern about AI, and then responding to it effectively. So I think that's the durability of the strategy, is really being on, having your finger on the pulse of what consumers are experiencing at any given time, what their values are, and then really speaking to that. That doesn't have an expiration, even if AI free will eventually fade.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit like the environmental footprint of a company, right? Some companies can be have very low impact on the environment, and some can't, just by the nature of what they do. And probably the same is true of AI. But how you manage that, and how you communicate around what you are doing positively, feels like the right way forward. I agree with you. This is probably a difficult question, Jacob, but this whole kind of trust environment and thinking about the digital stakeholders, and many of whom I'm sure are your clients. So do you see any early signs of kind of winners and losers on this whole kind of trust theme around AI? Are there any sort of things you'd call out there?
I think it's going to be a fast moving target in terms of who the winners and losers are going to be, both in terms of AI and advancement, just sheer capability, but also in terms of public support and consumer adoption. Now, I think one example I would use to illustrate that is sort of the OpenAI Anthropic rivalry that we've seen. Now, OpenAI has been, has been the front runner. It launched ChatGPT back in fall of 2022, and it was the only player in town at that point. But more recently, we saw the scenario where Anthropic had expressed concerns about a deal with the Pentagon over not wanting Claude to be used for autonomous weapons and surveillance, both things that the public is concerned about. And then OpenAI kind of had swooped in to fill Anthropic's shoes in that deal, and we saw immediate consumer backlash over that, and we saw Anthropic's Claude get more users while people canceling their ChatGPT subscriptions. So again, an example of any tech company with a consumer base is going to want to pay attention to that. Now, on the flip side of that, we have, Palantir is another leading AI company, but a big difference with Palantir. And of course, that's an AI company that's working directly with AI and surveillance, something again that the public is concerned about. But they don't rely on consumers for their revenue. They don't have, that's a company that doesn't have the same type of need to read the room as like Anthropic or OpenAI that depend directly on users, on consumers. So those are some examples that kind of, I think, illustrate how it's hard to say who the winners and losers are going to be. In addition to the fact that I think the public can have a short collective memory on these things. And so while that really caused, a spike for Anthropic and a decline for OpenAI, I don't necessarily think that instance is going to have really long-term implications. It really depends on what the companies do next around these issues. If your revenue depends on a consumer base, direct consumer base, then it's how your values and how you act on them is certainly going to have an impact. I think another great example of a company that is fully aware of this is Apple. Apple from the beginning, from the back 2022 when ChatGPT was released, has been really cautious on AI in its messaging. I mean, to this day, it still avoids even using the term artificial intelligence, and it opts for things like Apple Intelligence, machine learning, neural engines. Really steers away from the AI terminology, and it's very intentional. I think Apple kind of had read the tea leaves well in foreseeing that generative AI is a really messy technology, and it's going to create optics problems, which it has. And so it really steered away from that, and instead tried to market its own brand that seems different, I think, in the public's eye. I mean, I don't think that a lot of people probably don't necessarily understand that machine learning is a type of AI, for example, and that Apple Intelligence is essentially AI. The strategy there is using AI effectively to create products that sell, products that are really useful to people, either in their work lives or their daily personal lives, instead of making the AI feature label front and center and trying to sell that as a product. I think that's the misstep. Now, the catch for companies, and I think this is a catch I think Apple's a great example here, is that while you're investing in trying to build products that consumers will buy, AI is increasingly going to be the kind of mortar that you build that with. And so you have to continue to invest in AI and AI infrastructure, or I think you will get left behind by your competitors on innovation and capabilities front. So it's a bit of a balancing act, and I think it's kind of too soon to really say who's going to win or lose on that.
Apple, we could do a whole podcast on Apple. I think Apple's fascinating, has always been a fascinating company and continues to be a fascinating company, but we can probably rely on them to put beautiful products in people's hands for some time to come. I guess we've had a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Maybe for just a last question for you, Jacob. So, and you might have covered some of this already, but so looking ahead and trying to think about this trust, dynamic, what are sort of one or two trends that you would say people or perhaps your clients should watch? What are you predicting trend wise?
Yeah, there's a few trends to watch, I think, especially for brands. I mean, so we talked about the AI-free messaging driven by the anti-AI sentiment, and I said that that has an expiration date, which I think it does. But what I think doesn't have an expiration date is something that is sort of running alongside that, and that is this drive for sort of an analog lifestyle, and that involves kind of people unplugging digitally. And so I think the future we're going to see kind of parallel tracks. On the one hand, AI is going to become more pervasive in the digital ecosystem. It's not going anywhere. It's definitely, I think it's baked into our digital future. And people are also, alongside all of this anti-AI sentiment, I think it's important to emphasize that people are using AI in increasing numbers. We're going to have an increasingly AI-powered digital future. However, I think that is going to also increase demand for genuine human real-world experiences. And you're seeing that show up in various ways. I mean, a couple of examples are, students on college campuses creating smartphone-free spaces so they can come and engage with other students. You're seeing, adults, have physical book clubs out in nature in the woods, things like that. People crafting more, and so I think, even the going analog term kind of went viral there for a minute, but I think it has more durability and staying power in longer term than AI free does. But I think the takeaway for brands is that being digitally savvy is going to continue to be important and vital. You also have to understand how to continue to connect with consumers around things that they value in the real tactile world, and really adjust your messaging around whatever that is in the moment. So that's one trend that I think is important to think about. Another is that AI adoption is so important, and adopting as well is so important. But I think we haven't fully, and at the end, when I say we, I mean the end users, and whether it's individuals, teams, companies, we've been so far shielded from the true cost of the technology. It's incredibly expensive and resource intensive to build and deploy. And so I think I'm anticipating some real pain points coming ahead when companies, teams, people, workers have become very dependent on AI and their workflows, on the automation it allows for, really kind of offloaded some of that cognitive capability to the AI. And then we get slapped with bigger bills when the economics kind of catches up with us. So I think that the message around that trend, my message would be, you have to use and adopt AI. I think that's a surety at this point, but don't be completely dependent on it. Don't offload all your capabilities to the technology, because I think it is going to continue to have reliability issues, and also I think that the costs are going to become more visible.
Yeah, I mean the underlying economic forces have to come out, right? It's like if we're all being heavily cross-subsidized at this moment in time for the purposes of user acquisition, and the monetization comes later. This is a classic sort of tech industry trend. I suppose the challenge the thought I have is that I remember my first mobile phone was a Nokia, I think it was a Nokia 2110. I'm going back to the 90s, a long time ago, before some of our listeners were even born. And phones back then were actually pretty cheap compared to, I'm an iPhone user, the iPhone I have today. And yet at the time, they didn't seem cheap. They seemed pretty expensive, but somehow the industry, and this is obviously a consumer product or a consumer-centric view, has taken us on this journey where we somehow see, maybe you mentioned it earlier, we're suddenly able to pay 5x. Now, the device is not the same. My iPhone is not the same as my Nokia 2110, but I wonder if that's an analogy for what will happen with AI, that yes, we might become increasingly dependent on it, but it's going to do so much in terms of economic value creation, let's say for your employer, that actually that's going to be okay. I mean, I suppose this is the existential question for investing in AI, right? Is the ROI there?
Yeah, and that you're making an amazing point there, and I think it comes back to, I mean, that would be the ideal outcome, and I think that there is probably a path to get there, and I think it would help. Investing in that path would also help in terms of public opinion around it. I mean, investing in more energy efficient AI infrastructure, for example, would be one way to both boost public opinion and also make the technology cheaper. And you said the ROI part. Well, yeah, so maybe slowing down and seeing how we can make best use of it in terms of integrating it into current operations versus barreling ahead with raw capability, I think would be another good way to ensure that we have that kind of ideal outcome from it. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you one very last question then, to try and draw all those threads together. So Elon is talking about putting data centers in orbit. You talked about the physical build. So is this technological wizardry at the edge that at some point we're likely to see, or is this actually PR for XAI? What's your judgment call on this one?
I mean, it's a fascinating question. It's a hard one because there's a lot of it's a technical question, I think, in part. It's not just PR. I think that there are real bottlenecks in terms of data center efficiencies, in terms of cooling, for example, and also just land use concerns that make it reasonable to look for other places to put data centers. Microsoft had looked at ocean data centers, and there's obviously issues with that, even though obviously the cooling piece is much simpler. And of course, Musk isn't the only one who's looking at putting data centers in orbit. I believe that NVIDIA is also another company looking at that as well. Obviously, again, the cooling situation is one of the main reasons to do it. One issue, of course, is we have a lot of devices going up in orbit already. Musk is one of the people who's behind it in terms of satellite, satellites. And I think the orbit is starting to get a bit crowded, and there's concerns about space trash and impacts from that. So that's one downside. The other is, and I think this is an area that's going to require more R&D, and it's just that because space is a vacuum, the cooling, obviously it seems intuitive that you'd be able to have a cooler data center in space versus on land, but it's actually harder to radiate the heat from a data center out in space because it's a vacuum. There's nothing to radiate the heat onto. Yeah. And so it's a bit of a physics problem that I'm not sure exactly what XAI and NVIDIA have in terms of a technical workaround for. I imagine there are technical workarounds for it, and I imagine that they're probably expensive. And so the question is, does that extra cost that you're going to need offset, what you would have spent on land in terms of, the energy efficiency bit. So I don't think it's not crazy. There are some real downsides, and I think it's going to come down to basically technical capability as to whether it makes sense from an energy efficiency standpoint. And then, of course, there's not a whole lot of way to get around the fact that just like land use land is scarce. I mean, the area around our orbit is also finite as well. So there might need to be some other some further thinking in terms of whether or not that's a good idea in the long run.
Fascinating topic, that one, and I think we'll watch that one over the next decades, if not years. Jacob, really fascinating discussion. I think we covered a huge swathe of topics. Thank you for your insights and your thoughts. I had a lot of fun, and thank you for joining us on the podcast. Yeah,
thanks so much for having me today, Chris. It's been a pleasure, and hope to chat with you again sometime.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of After the Download. If you found today's insights valuable, subscribe to stay ahead of the curve at the intersection of technology, data, and consumer behavior. Please take a moment to share, rate, and review, helping us grow this exciting new thought leadership channel. And keep joining us as we connect you to world-class product and brand strategists, data experts, and key observers of the digital space. We also welcome your feedback. Feel free to send us your ideas and observations at atdownload@realitymine.com. That's @download@realitymine.com. Thanks, and see you next time.